Welcome back everyone, it's Charlie. This will be my full X-Men 97 Season 2 Episode 6 video. There are a whole bunch of Easter eggs, references to the comics, WTF moments, so we'll break it all down. Everybody be careful when you book time in the Danger Room this week. We got a lot of Danger Room during the original X-Men animated series episodes, and they did some live-action Danger Room during the original Bryan Singer era of X-Men. We're going to see that cast come back in Avengers Doomsday, but I think the idea is that when Kevin Feige does his own reboot version of X-Men with the 2028 movie, going forward, we'll see way more comic book X-Men stuff like the Danger Room that will just have the level of effects necessary to pull off a really cool Danger Room. The episode is titled Danger.EXE, as in the command Danger.EXE, like start, there's danger now, because the Danger Room gains sentience, calling itself Danger, which was a big arc in the comics from Joss Whedon during Astonishing X-Men. The reason why it gained sentience and what it was trying to do in that comic book run was different from this episode. In the original comic book version, it was trying to get revenge on the X-Men for keeping it trapped in this state, using it as a machine this whole time. But in the episode, it claimed that it was just evolving to satisfy Professor X's conditions to make them strong enough to fight Apocalypse, and by the end of the episode, it claims that it was successful in doing that, pushing them to become strong enough because survival of the fittest, because it was repeating Apocalypse's lines, because it had Cerebro tech, so it was basically pulling all these greatest fears and all their worries from them so that it could push them to get stronger. The actual name of the story where the Danger character premiered for the first time in the comics was Dangerous. This time they give Valerie Cooper the previously on because it's a big X Factor episode, at least at the beginning here, and it's a big Polaris episode. She was on X Factor at the beginning, but does get kicked off by the end of the episode. And even though I didn't say this in my previous video, Polaris is being voiced in the episode by the same person who voices the character in Marvel Rivals. During the intro this time, they mostly use the classic roster because everybody's back in present day and it largely takes place at the X-Mansion. The only real changes from last week in terms of scenes are adding scenes for the X-Factor team and Professor X inside Cerebro because of what he does at the beginning of the episode. We also get a new scene of the Sentinels' attack on Genosha because they go back to Genosha and to reference Gambit's death because Apocalypse resurrects him as one of his 4 horsemen at the end of the episode. So it is also a very big Gambit episode, even though he only appears at the very end, confirming all our theories. They are doing the comic book thing, becoming a horseman just like I did in the comics. He became the Horseman of Death in the comics, and they reference that at the end of this episode too, so he will be his Horseman of Death. The other big Easter egg connection, too, is that Archangel used to be Apocalypse's Horseman of Death. Now he's on X-Force, so it'll be interesting to see how he reacts to Gambit becoming the new Horseman of Death. Another classic X-Man becoming another one of the Horsemen. Now the question is going to be, will Apocalypse use other dead X-Men as his new Horsemen? There are a number of characters that died on Genosha or have died at other points that he can resurrect as his 4 Horsemen. Who is the next one going to be? That's the real question. During the opening scene, we see Professor X in the Danger Room constantly reliving the events of Magneto's death over and over again, trying to learn more about what happened with Apocalypse, just learning for ways to try and defeat him and just process it, sort of like a version of therapy. He calls it his version of therapy, even though it doesn't seem that healthy. While this is going on, and later in the episode, we constantly see the camera zoom in on Danger's eyepiece, and it looks kind of like a humanoid eye, and it's just watching everybody constantly, and it's been doing this for the entire run the X-Men have existed, like years and years of just watching them slowly getting to the point where it gains sentience. Over and over again, the simulation fails until on the last loop, Apocalypse steps on his head, almost killing him, the Danger Room claiming that it was in response to repeated failure indicators, and is in failure they need to defeat Apocalypse, so is trying to find a way to push Professor X to use his powers to defeat Apocalypse.
This was intended to be a therapeutic exercise, not a training one.
Which is exactly what she does to Polaris at the end of the episode, who pushes her powers to a new limit. She's not Omega level like a lot of the other really powerful mutants, but she is very powerful. The actual Danger Room in the X-Men comics works a lot like the holodeck in Star Trek The Next Generation, where safety protocols can be turned off, so the simulations are light-based, but they can't have mass and they can't actually hurt you. It starts talking about how it was adapting, foreshadowing how it's going to evolve into its final boss form. And it takes what Professor X says as its new objective being to prepare the X-Men and the new Generation X younger mutants to defeat Apocalypse in the most efficient way possible, which is obviously very ominous. We also get confirmation that Professor X did not take Magneto's helmet with them when they returned to the present, and all these scenes also feel like they're kind of foreshadowing Onslaught. It feels like we get a couple of Onslaught references across this episode, with Professor X talking over and over again about thinking of Magneto. Is Magneto still in my head? I want to be with Magneto, combining his powers with Polaris at the end of the episode, and she has powers like Magneto's powers. Just a lot of repeated imagery of Professor X combining with Magneto in different ways across the episode. So if you're really looking forward to them doing Onslaught at some point this season, they might actually work up to that. Cameo said that before he was let go, he actually planned on doing Onslaught for real, but they might have changed that storyline after he left. We'll see if they did. So for a little while, it was confirmed that we were going to get Onslaught. Polaris then goes full Magneto to take down Reverend William Stryker and his Purifiers from the comics. They teased them last season. This is an official X-Factor mission though, like she's still on X-Factor now. He gets his hands on vibranium weapons, or his team gets hands on vibranium weapons, which they plan to use to kill mutants. He is one of the more powerful anti-mutant leaders on the planet from the X-Men comics. We will probably see an MCU version of him at some point in the future. They did Stryker in the classic Bryan Singer X-Men movies, but they changed the character radically. This version on X-Men 97 and the original X-Men the animated series is meant to be more comic book accurate. There's more of a religious bend to him than they did in the live-action X-Men movies. They mostly use this to show off her powers just because it's been a while since we've seen Polaris do a lot of stuff on the show. She was on X-Men the animated series back in the day too. Valerie Cooper yelling in her ear for being too destructive because she runs the team. It's a government-sponsored team, so that's why Valerie Cooper's in charge. Not wanting her to kill humans because it'll make human-mutant relations even worse. She winds up getting really pissed off at them when they continue to fire on her, throwing the ship at them with her powers. Havoc winds up saving their lives because he's still towing the line. He's technically the team leader, so he's following the government's orders, just pissing Polaris off even more with all this government oversight. We then find out in the wake of Season 1, in their fight with Bastion and all the collateral damage, President Kelly has outlawed the X-Men, at least in the United States. He only has jurisdiction in the United States, which is why Professor X moves the X-Men and creates X-Corp on Genosha, which puts them far out of U.S. jurisdiction at the end of the episode. Also pissing the government off. Valerie Cooper's like, oh, we'll come after you, we'll get you eventually. But it's a really funny example of Professor X just using his mind, like not his powers, but his actual mind. Like he's a very smart person, even without being a super powerful telepath. Fight smarter, not harder. Valerie Cooper references people calling Polaris the new Magneto and that she is his daughter. Polaris is only the half-sister of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver from the comics. They have different mothers. Polaris' mother was Susanna Dane, who Magneto had an affair with. That's why she goes by the Lorna Dane name, and why she kind of grew up feeling like the black sheep of the family, so to speak. But their family has been so messed up, so dramatic over all the years, that that's not really saying a lot, that she's the black sheep of that group of people. The closest we've gotten to Polaris in live action was on The Gifted TV show. They did a version of Polaris on that, and she started to become more comic booky towards the end of that run. Maybe Kevin Feige will introduce a version of her at some point in the future of the MCU. It just feels like easy territory. Like there's just a lot of characters that he can do now that they have the X-Men IP. She then complains she's not turning into her father, which means she's totally turning into her father. She talks about mutant rights, which is a very Magneto kind of thing to do. And Valerie Cooper fires her from X-Factor, which is actually doing her a favor because now she can go back to the X-Men. And even though I didn't mention it in a previous episode, Havoc is being voiced by Teddy Sears, who plays Zoom on the Flash TV show, so that's why he sounds familiar if you recognize his voice. We see that Professor X has started rebuilding the X-Mansion. It gets destroyed all the time. This is very normal for him. They do it in the live-action movies all the time. Like every big X-Men movie that comes along, the X-Mansion seems like it gets destroyed. It will get destroyed again during Avengers Doomsday. Just par for the course. He gives a speech at the start of a new school term to all the Generation X mutants, all the new kids, and there's most of them from the comics. Like there's a ton of them here. Quentin Quire, Kid Omega, iBoy, Nature Girl, Bling, Hindsight, Chamber, Gaia, Husk, Monet St. Croix, Mondo, Penance, Skin, Sync, Wing, and Dupe. Dupe is one of the biggest deep cuts too. I was surprised to see him in the lineup. There are a couple of very, very powerful mutants here, and I know I'm leaving some out, so if there are a couple that you spotted that I didn't mention, just write them below in the comments. But like, these are basically like all the Generation X mutants from the comics. You also notice that Quentin Quire is wearing a Magneto t-shirt, so like big Magneto fan. Storm is now the headmistress, and Forge is on the teaching staff, also probably going to have to help them rebuild the Danger Room after it gains sentience and they destroy it at the end of the episode. Gonna need to use that Danger Room to train our students, so we gotta rebuild a new one. He then reveals mid-sentence that they are in the Danger Room and teases them with a Sentinel attack, which feels like a very classic Season 1 of X-Men the Animated Series, like way back in the day kind of thing to do. Like, Sentinels are easy potatoes, like we'll have way bigger problems than this later this season. When he says danger lurks everywhere, that's meant to be foreshadowing for the Danger Room sentience attacking them later. Polaris then returns to the X-Mansion looking for Jean Grey, Scott, the other original X-Men that are still around that she knows about because she's an OG X-Men, part of the original 6 on the cartoon. In the comics, it was just the original 5. Polaris wasn't on that very first roster. She finds her old room, seems like it's untouched, as Jean Grey says, like the professor didn't want us to mess with it, so left it as it was. You see a picture of her with Iceman, who implies that they were in a relationship, but he's died at some point. They imply that he's dead. That's why he's not here. You haven't seen him this season or last season. All the decor feels very 70s, 80s, because this is like the 90s, so you have to remember the original team was a good long while ago. Beast then quotes Tryon Edwards, the poet, and outside you see Morph playing with the Generation X kids. He changes into Reed Richards from the Fantastic Four, so we get another member of the Fantastic Four. He was the Thing recently. How long before he changes into all 4? But here's the problem. He can only mimic physically based powers, so he can't do invisibility, and he can't do flames, so he can just make himself look like Johnny Storm and Sue Storm. He can't actually replicate their powers. When Professor X says he hoped a piece of Magneto might remain in his mind, that feels like another one of the Onslaught foreshadowing moments. He then says a group of them are going back to Genosha to check on it because nobody's been back there since the Sentinels attack last season, and because he has the idea to set up X-Corp, so he's starting to prepare for that. Makes a little joke about Polaris not being half as bad for the kids as Wolverine, just that she is a rebel. She was a rebel when she was on the team, kind of like Wolverine is a bit of a wild child.
Please. They met Wolverine.
Then the X-Men rush to the Danger Room when Wing gets hurt as part of a simulation, but we find this is just a trap that Danger, the sentience of the Danger Room, laid for them because it needed to evolve and it needed Polaris' power in order to do that. So you kind of see its logic. The Danger Room injures one of the kids, so all the X-Men, including Polaris, will come rushing to help him, then trap them in there and use their powers to power itself up so that she can evolve into its current final boss form. That was the whole idea later in the episode, is that it was using their energy to repair itself, the energy that Polaris was giving off, until they overwhelmed it. But they also use this whole sequence here of the Danger Room attacking them, using all their greatest fears, to remind you that it does have Cerebro tech so it can read their minds, and that's how it knows what they are afraid of to torture them with. We get a really cool moment where it takes them to Bishop's future, the Days of Future Past timeline, like, oh, this is where I'm from, it's terrible. Next, it throws a bunch of Prime Sentinels at them from Season 1. When Danger says only the strongest survive, it's taunting them with Apocalypse's line because it's read their minds and it knows what Apocalypse said in present day and in the past as well too. It repeats Apocalypse's line a couple of times, survival of the fittest, only the strongest survive. It also calls Professor X too weak to do what's necessary and has a real big mouth on it, like taunts Polaris a lot, knowing that it wants her to create that big energy discharge so it can form its final body. So that's why it was making fun of Polaris so much, making her so pissed off. Bishop's line about it always being another killing machine is very Terminator adjacent, but it's a reference to the Sentinels in present day, then the eventual evolution of Nimrod in his future timeline, then eventually Bastion during the events of Season 1, like it's always another killing machine that just comes along. Danger then spanks them hard, steals an X-Jet, and goes after Professor X and the others on Genosha, but this is all part of the greater simulation that it was trying to fulfill, the orders that it was going on based on what Professor X said, help them all become strong enough to fight Apocalypse. So even though it seems like it's trying to kill them in revenge, it's actually just trying to fulfill Professor X's original programming. And to be fair, it was successful, like, mission accomplished, as it's destroyed at the end of the episode by Polaris. When we go to Genosha, we see the X-Men are now wearing the Grant Morrison Frank Quietly suits. Professor X also puts his on by the end of the episode, so now they're all in that era of suits from the comics. We get a really cool use of Jean Grey's powers and Cyclops teaming up using psionic Wolverine claws and splitting his eye beam with all of them, showing how they've learned new tricks, and her psionic tornado, which is really cool. They also use this to give you some really cool Professor X moments, showing that he does have some sick weapons built into his yellow chair and some skills, which she makes fun of, Danger makes fun of, like, oh, I've hurt your yellow floaty chair. And it's meant to be a really good example of how Professor X can still hold his own in a fight even when he can't use his psychic abilities. There are a lot of people talking about this when the Avengers Doomsday trailer was released a couple days ago. Like, what would Professor X do if he couldn't use his psychic abilities against Doctor Doom or like these other big threats that are happening in Avengers Doomsday? But they want to show you, at least in the comics, he does have some skills because the X-Men 97 episodes go more based on the comics than the live-action movie stuff. So in addition to being the world's most powerful telepath, he is also extremely, extremely clever. Like, he's a very intelligent person. What other fancy weapons does he have hidden on him? Danger then says she's going for the head this time, which feels like a Thor and Thanos reference. You should have gone for the head. Also, we got a moment like that in the Avengers Doomsday trailer where Thor goes for Doctor Doom's head, even though he's not successful. And Professor X realizes the only way to actually defeat Danger is to overwhelm her with too much power, more than she can handle, and basically combines his powers and uses his psionic memories of Magneto to power her up even more. So this moment of them combining their powers and all these memories from Magneto feels like another Onslaught reference as well.
Maybe.
As Danger goes out, she says mission accomplished, like my goal was accomplished, you're now strong enough to fight Apocalypse, but the problem is that we meet his new Horseman of Death, Gambit, at the end of the episode, and we're going to meet the other Horseman eventually too, meaning Apocalypse is also getting even stronger too at the same time. So it's this big race of escalation this season between both sides. Professor X then ends the episode giving a big speech about new beginnings, reimagining yourself with a new path forward in Magneto's spirit, claiming that the X-Men are going to evolve, calling it X-Corp from the comics, building it on Genosha, and thus not subject to the laws of the United States. Haha, very clever, take that, President of the United States. Valerie Cooper seems very pissed off, says that X-Factor and the US government will be on his tail, like we'll come and get you eventually. We will see how that goes down, like Apocalypse is way, way bigger a threat than the US government. And while they're having their first meeting, Professor X says that he can now sense Apocalypse in present day growing stronger, which they use to foreshadow Gambit's return on the other side of the planet. We then go to Athens, Greece, in an underground temple that Apocalypse probably used in ancient Greece, like actual ancient Greece, and that's why he knows that it's there, as he resurrects Gambit and turns him into his new Horseman of Death. So we actually get a special reference to this too during the actual transformation scene, like his big glow-up magical girl transformation into the Horseman of Death. The cards, death, means that he is going to become the Horseman of Death. The tower is a reference to the X-Corp tower we just saw with the X-Men, and the lovers is a reference to his relationship with Rogue. In the original comics, Apocalypse turned him into the Horseman of Death for different reasons, like the circumstances were different, but it was part of the Blood of Apocalypse storyline, and it was after a big, big tragedy after M-Day, and the population of mutants had been reduced to almost nothing. So it's not exactly what happened on the show. They're using the Genosha tragedy to sort of mirror that M-Day from the comics. The show's reason for Apocalypse choosing Gambit specifically to resurrect as his Horseman of Death, because Apocalypse could do that to anybody that he wants, why Gambit, is clearly because of his conversation with Rogue in the past, before he became Apocalypse. He wants to do maximum damage to the X-Men, hurt them as much as possible, and he knows how much they care about Gambit, specifically Rogue, so he knows how much his heel turn in this season is going to do to them. Gambit going full Hulk Hogan heel turn. But it kind of seems like they're saying that next week's episode is going to be a big Horseman of Death Gambit episode with him revealing himself or him doing something with his powers, like some cool stuff. So Gambit is back, everybody best remember it. And if you couldn't tell, now because he is the Horseman of Death, Apocalypse juices him up with way more power. It was the same thing with Angel becoming Archangel. He became way more powerful as Archangel. Everybody post all your reactions in the comments below and let me know if you spotted any Easter eggs or references in the episode that I didn't talk about in the video. My full episode 7 video will post next week after they release it, so be sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss that. Also, big reminder that Marvel Comic-Con panel is Saturday night. It's supposed to be a big Avengers Doomsday panel, but they might release footage of some other things too. We'll see. Whatever they wind up releasing, of course I will do all the videos for it. Everybody click here for that, and everybody click here for all my X-Men 97 episodes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.